Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be reacting to this video, why being a cultural Christian makes no sense. So yeah, let's just get into it, and I'll respond when I have something to respond to. I'll react when I have something to respond to, basically.
Richard Dawkins has for a very long time been the most famous atheist on planet Earth. Obviously, he's written extensively about why Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all religions are wrong. He's written about the so-called God delusion, this idea that a belief in a higher power is in fact a delusion, but he has simultaneously called himself a cultural Christian. So here he was on LBC talking about his views of cultural Christianity.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer. But there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. So, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural.
Well, if the amount of Christians goes down, then that is definitely a possibility given enough time.
Christian, I think it wouldn't matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Okay, but we have substituted an alternative religion, and that religion is paganism, because the reality is that when you cut off a civilization from its Judeo-Christian roots, what you end up with is a paganistic replacement for that religion. Humanism devolves.
That is basically false, at least at face value, but I'll see what he has to say.
Into paganism pretty quickly, because all of the central premises of humanism, things like reliance on human reason, make an argument for human reason as an independent force. You cannot, from an evolutionarily biological perspective.
That's more of like a philosophical stance, but not rather than a religious one. But it is secular at the end of the day, making arguments for human reason. It's not necessarily supernatural.
Yeah, you can say that human beings are capable of using their brains in order to adapt to their environment. You cannot say that human beings are capable of searching for truth. There is no such thing as truth in evolutionary biology. There's just what's effective.
That is true. It doesn't define what truth is. It just says how we evolved, essentially. But how we evolved is basically independently been verified.
And what's not effective. Everything is utilitarian in nature. You can't make the case for higher concepts like justice or freedom if you are operating from a non-God-based universe. You might be able to live that way individually. You can be like Richard Dawkins and be an atheist and be a cultural Christian. But you cannot separate the church building that he is praising there off from what goes on inside the church. The church building...
Well, I'll give it to Ben. That is basically what happens.
...is an outward manifestation of the soul that is the church. The same thing is true of our civilization. Our civilization is built in a particular way, on particular frameworks and foundations. And when you destroy those foundations and frameworks, what you end up with is secularist pursuit of values that ends up undermining itself and eating itself. You end up with postmodernism. The reason that postmodernism is a natural outgrowth is because it is a natural decay. You go from a thriving civilization, an Enlightenment civilization that was in fact rooted in Judeo-Christian values. This is why, for example, when it comes to capitalism, Adam Smith wrote Theory of Moral Sentiments before he wrote Wealth of Nations. Theory of Moral Sentiments is an entire book about virtue and the necessity thereof. And then he wrote Wealth of Nations, which was predicated on the idea that when you have a civilization that does in fact promote virtue, capitalism can thrive. The same thing is true of things like free speech. These all exist on deeper foundations. Those deeper foundations are religious in nature. Trying to separate those off, pretending that they are the natural state of the world, is historically ignorant. History is in fact contingent. The Enlightenment rests on Christian bases. Pretending that it does not means that you end up severing the two. And an enlightenment severed from its Christian bases ends in terror. It actually ends in gulags and death camps. The cost of living has already increased 17%.
Oh, this is an ad, I think, so I'll just skip it.
End up with a higher secular humanism. You end up with a...
But I do want to say that a society is secular doesn't necessarily mean it descends into chaos. Like, let's take wokeism as an example. If you do see that as a bad thing, it doesn't necessarily exist in all secular societies. Like, in China, for example, I'm guessing all this Western culture stuff, they'll see wokeism as complete nonsense. I'm not saying that's how I see it, I'm saying how most people in China would see it. And they'd reject it, and they're mostly a secular society, and I think they are a secular state by law, and because they're still nominally a communist state, and society there is also very secular. So, but then again, politics has definitely had a role to play in that.
In pursuit of power, you end up with the pursuit of the Ubermensch, because you live in a cold, meaningless universe in which will is the only thing that matters. Power is the only thing that matters. This is why the arguments that are currently made about how, for example, freedom of speech is just a guise for power. This is the argument the left makes against freedom of speech. Property rights are not about the natural outgrowth of human beings want to create and to cultivate. They are, in fact, an imposition by a powerful cadre of people who are attempting to victimize you. They are bad. They are a tool of the patriarchy. Those ideas are natural outgrowths of severing natural law. That's a natural outgrowth of suggesting that the universe is, in fact, not ruled by a creator who created a human nature, and that human nature has natural consequences like property rights, or should have those natural consequences. That the freedom of the mind that is guaranteed by Genesis 1:27, where it says we're all made in the image of God, meaning that we are creative and capable of will. And when you cut that off, you end up with everything is just power dynamics and power relations. As a civilization, you cut yourself off from your roots, and what you end up with is Scotland passing laws suggesting that you cannot speak freely on matters of whether a man is a woman or not.
I do want to say that I oppose the hate speech laws that recently got passed in Scotland. They're very authoritarian, so yes, I most definitely oppose them, just like most Scottish people, I believe.
And whoever is in power gets to cudgel the other side. That's a natural consequence. So, people have asked me many times, can there be a moral atheist? Sure, there can be a moral atheist. Can there be a system built on atheism that is moral? No, there cannot. There cannot be a civilizational system built on atheism. This is why when Richard Dawkins says he's a cultural Christian, the question that we should all be asking ourselves is twofold. One, is he right that our civilization...
Morals are, at the end of the day, subjective, and I reject the idea that they can be that there is objective morality made by God, because simply there isn't. Because even if there was a God, and he supposedly said whatever things, even that would be subjective by how I view it.
It rests on Christian foundations. And the answer is yes, of course he is right about that. The second question we should ask is, then why are we destroying those Christian foundations? If the church building exists but there's nobody inside, how long...
Well, the reason is because religion is hundreds of thousands of years old, and we're becoming more of a secularized society now, so there's less need for religion, essentially.
Do you expect the civilization to thrive? If the civilization built on the Bible discards the Bible, how long do you expect that civilization to continue along the lines it has previously continued? And the argument by Dawkins and other atheists presumably will be, yes, but all that's untrue. Those would be necessary myths, but they're necessary myths. But they're myths. And so truth matters more. So first of all, I would ask, how are you defining truth? Because according to...
I define truth as describing what happened in reality, basically. And it's hard to give a very exact definition, but that's the rough definition describing what happened in reality.
Again, folks like Richard Dawkins, and again,
I could probably think of a better definition if I thought long enough, but that's my quick answer.
Richard Dawkins' work is really interesting, but according to folks like Richard Dawkins, when he says, we can't believe the Bible because it's not true, my question is, what in evolutionary biology suggests that truth is of any paramount value? If, in fact, he's...
Evolutionary biology does not claim to describe what truth is in the first place. So, but it does reject the idea that we were created by God essentially, and we evolved from common ancestors.
In adaptation and the necessity of adaptation, then you should be a believer in the Bible simply on the adaptability basis of it. You should be a Christian because it is useful to be a Christian. Because that's what evolution says. Evolution is all about utility. Evolution is not about fundamental truth. But he says you have to discard.
Religion is about fundamental truth. Utility, though, not so much.
The Bible, because it is quote-unquote not fundamentally true, because you can't prove the miracles, you can't prove God. Okay, but in what world, in your world, why does truth with a capital T matter? It shouldn't. You live in evolutionary meme land, right? The basic idea that genes are self-replicating and seek to survive. Right? All of that is predicated on a notion of adaptability and utility. It is not predicated on a notion of truth. So you can't rely upon my religious notions of truth in order to knock out the Bible. Number two, why exactly shouldn't it be true? If it is proved that Western civilization is in fact the highest form of civilization that man has experienced, and it is rooted in Christian and Judaic values, there are two possibilities. One, it's a necessary myth, a Platonic necessary myth. And two, is maybe there's truth to it. Maybe it's true. And maybe it seems that while people like Richard Dawkins can individually reject the premises of the Bible while accepting the conclusions, maybe it turns out that the vast majority of the population cannot and should not. Maybe it turns out that we need more Christians going to church, and we need more Jews going to synagogue.
But ultimately it depends on the individual. You can't really force them to do so unless the government says so, which in that case I would heavily oppose the government forcing you to have a religion.
Maybe that's actually really important to civilization, otherwise you end up in the muck that we currently find ourselves. What I would say to Richard Dawkins is, if you like the Christmas carols, someone needs to believe in Christ to sing them. If you like the churches, somebody has to go to church to actually maintain the church. If you like the civilization in which you live, somebody's got to maintain those biblical roots. Somebody's got to go to the garden and cultivate and guard it. It's pretty important, right?
I'm guessing that's the end of the video, so... But the final point I'll make is I think what Dawkins really wants at the end of the day is human rights for people, and not necessarily religious law, but what he was getting at was, I like Christmas, but not necessarily the religion, and Christmas, for example, has very much been secularized, and just we've kept it as a cultural thing, but that's really it at the end of the day. But the UK, as of right now, is very much a secularized society. But yeah, that's all I've got to say, so thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.